Good evening, good afternoon, good morning. It's your boy the Insane Game Break. It's your boy the Insane Game Break. So, a lot of you guys wanted societal discussions back. I don't know if I would call that. This is more of just me talking about something. And hey, Black History Month, might as well do something festive. Why don't we? I'm going to analyze the idea and the premise of an Uncle Tom. Now, I'm not going to go through the historical context because if anyone wants that, there are plenty of channels who go through the history of an Uncle Tom. When I say an Uncle Tom, what I'm really referring to is the idea of what people view an Uncle Tom is in current day. Like when a black person calls another black person an Uncle Tom, what that means and what the problems and like what the understanding of what's going on. So when a black person is called an Uncle Tom in modern day, it usually means you've essentially thrown away your blackness. It is meant to strip your blackness from you by calling you something that is supposedly a representative of the fact that you are no longer what most people would deem an African American, or at least what that individual deems as an African American or a black person or a person of color, because we have 16 different things to say the same thing. Whatever. It's too early. I don't want to get mad about that. And what ends up happening is that that person's blow is supposed to be. A lot of people say, for a black person, their biggest pride, our biggest pride as an African American, is the fact that we're an African American. The pride in oneself, the pride in your blackness, essentially. And a lot of people say this with the full intention to hurt that individual. Although the premise doesn't make sense, because if you really believe them to be this betrayer of African American culture, then why would you call them something that really means that won't hurt them? Being called an Uncle Tom only hurts if you do care about black people and do care about your race, and you want to be connected and stay connected to your race, and you're being told that you aren't even close. But if you believe them to be the Uncle Tom that they are, quote unquote, then calling them Uncle Tom would do nothing for them, because they already disassociate from their blackness in the first place. And I guess my point is, why does that happen? Because you would think with the same general history that everyone has, well, how could you be that far removed? It's something I don't think the black community wants to openly recognize. The black community did not do a good job, at least for a time, and I would argue in some cases still, but definitely for a time, did not do a good job of fostering different types of black people. What I mean by that is this: since we all had the same general shared history of being forced to come to this country and being born into this country and had to be into servitude of this country and then have to fight for the rights that we were rightfully owed to begin with in this country. Because of all those things and struggles, I think there was this universal understanding where we're all the same, even though we knew that wasn't really the case. I mean, just with the premise of house Negroes who were just like, hey, I'm black, but I'm gonna like elevate myself the best that I can, and in that way I'm better than you field Negroes, because you're out there working to the bone in the hot sun and dying. And that's where that dichotomy kind of started. But even after that, which to me just shows the issue of human beings more than a black people thing, but I'm just, for the sake of this, we're going to refer to it specifically in the African American sense. So as times changed and people fought and died for our current rights as African Americans in this country, and things got better, regardless of what people want to act like, it got better than what it was. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. Is it the best it needs to be? Absolutely not. But it has definitely improved over time. It seemed like as that improved and people were like, okay, we're past segregation, black people should be able to do and go the same places white people are. And I'm like, great, cool. And everyone was like, yeah, cool for the majority anyway. I feel like African Americans didn't realize what that really entailed, which meant that your kids and their kids would be indoctrinated into things that you never heard of or dealt with, because you grew up in a society where you guys were forced to be separated all the time, or under the boot of a white man. And the reason why I say I don't think they were prepared is because as we started integrating more with other races in general, not even just white people, just other races in this country, you ended up getting black kids who were vastly different than like the stereotypical one type of black kid, right? The one black kid who grew up either in the hood or grew up in like these low income neighborhoods. You had kids and you had parents and kids who grew up like finally got to go into upper neighborhoods and made money and made things of themselves and became successful. So they didn't all act the same. We didn't all have the same dialect. We didn't all speak the same slang. We actually were just, we became more diverse as a people. Some of it would say homogenized, but that's a whole other issue in itself. The point is that black people stopped being this one shoe fits all thing, and we started becoming more and more diverse. We were already diverse as people to begin with, but it became more and more apparent because now you have black people growing up in different areas of the country with completely different experiences. But unfortunately, the stereotype, like all other stereotypes, harmed the community because the stereotype was still stuck in the hood. It was still stuck in the gutter, down in the dirt. So even as a black person who was able to move above that and become successful and become a part of that upper class, because like, hey, we can do it too, was then shunned by the community they came from, because they didn't come from a different community. They still came from that bottom, right? But because they made it, someone was like, oh, well, you changed, bruh. You lost your way. You lost the connection, man. You ain't nothing but one of them now. You got disassociated into the other culture because of the success you brought. And people always argue there's a right way and a wrong way to make success. But it wasn't even just the exaggerated cadence of someone like going from the same bottom but becoming extremely successful. It was also kids who were just different. One of the things that even triggered this video was a TikTok where a black man was talking about how he was chastised by other black kids for talking white, which if you're someone who speaks properly or speaks with like basic English and you don't speak in slang, you've probably heard that term from a black person at some point in your life. And this black woman decided to respond to it about how it had nothing to do with because of how you taught. It was because you essentially were associating with racist white people or carrying on the rhetoric of racist white people, which is making a whole bunch of assumptions on her part. But it's that kind of toxicity that most people who were very outside of their stereotype felt. So because I was in the Japanese animation from my personal experience and cartoons, and I really liked and I spoke proper English, I had plenty of my peers in public school bust me out. And look, it's not like the kids were busting me out specifically because I was talking white. It was particularly just because I was different. That's what kids do. If we look the same and we act the same, and the only difference is that we speak differently, kids will find any reason to pick at you. And if that's the only two things, that's why they pick at your weight, your height, your hair color. If you were going bald at a young age, any little thing that's different or out of the norm to bust you out for, that's what they would do. And let's be real here. If I grew up in a neighborhood that is predominantly of dudes who speak slang and I'm the only guy who's speaking proper English, guess what? That's a thing to pick at and bust you out for. So everything else was just like, oh, you listen to rock music? Weird. Japanese animation? Weird. You're into goth? Weird. You were into alternative rock? Weird. Like, just, it's like everything that was out of what people consider the norm for a black person, you got picked out and singled out and ostracized. And then we go back to the current time where you got so many like grown adults being called Uncle Toms and like betrayers of their race. And I'm not justifying their actions. And I'm not saying that the actions they ended up taking, because some of them are deplorable actions, were right. But I feel like the black community doesn't like to acknowledge or either recognize that, ostracizing them at a young age, I don't think really helped their situation. If you're already a kid who's in this hard, tough world as a black person in the 70s, 60s, 80s, or 90s or whatever, you know what you really need? You need your community to stand by you. And the one thing that really hurts a person is when your community doesn't stand by you because of an interest. Not because you did anything deplorable, not because you were on some radical white power stuff. It was literally because you were just different. and your parents didn't know how to deal with you. I have a friend, Tyrone. A lot of you know him. Tyrone the God 3. He always talks about how he had family members who were into like anime and video games and stuff like that. So like he always, that's kind of how he got early indoctrinated into that stuff. And I always tell him he's lucky because a lot of black families don't have that. It's funny, our generation is becoming that family member for the future generations. But when I was a child, I had no family whatsoever who I could connect with on animation, gaming, music, because my mother essentially raised us until I was in high school on strictly just black, or what she thought was black music. The kicker being is that rock is also black music. But I'm just raised on hip hop, R&B, jazz, that stuff. And that music is great. Don't ever get it twisted. But that wasn't the only things I became interested in. I started listening to things like Linkin Park and The Fray and Simple Plan and Sum 41 and 3 Days Grace. I started listening to those things in high school, and I felt more and more alienated by my own family because nobody got me, nor did anyone make the effort of trying to understand me. And when you feel that ostracized from your family members, who would be the people who would care and love for you most, that literally it's either your family or your friends. Those are like the two closest groups of people who will ever love and care about you the way you deserve to be, right? So when you feel disconnected from them and you go out into the world and you're just like, man, you just feel, and then other black people are on the same stuff. Oh, you weird. You want them what? You want those Oreos. This is what you. It's crazy to me that none of these terms are really positive terms, because when that person calls you an Oreo or says you talk white, it's meant to be an insult, because just the way white people look at black people as less than human, black people do the same thing. Now, granted, I'm not saying black people don't have a reason to feel the way they feel, but knowing how you feel and knowing that you taught your kids why you feel that way about white people, why would you then go bust out your son or your daughter or whatever on that specifically? Oh, that you're doing some white shit. You're doing some Asian shit. You're just doing some non-black shit. When you're not, that's not what's going on. You have an interest and it happens to be from a different culture, which is what happens when you put multiple cultures together. They start getting into each other's stuff. It's called a melting pot. And what frustrates me is that the black community very much does not like to address that reality. They like to pretend like it was your fault for being weird. I don't know if any of y'all seen that, what was it, Long Beach Griffey video where he was like, the reason why people picked on you wasn't because you like anime or manga. It was just because you were doing weird shit. And I'm just like, how fucking dare you? I don't like this fucking narrative that like the black community didn't, or not in his case, it wasn't the black community, but the point is, it was your fault that people were fucking with you. You're telling all these black kids who got ostracized from their own family and social groups because of the things they were into or the way they talked, and then said it wasn't because of your interest that we didn't like you. You were just weird. I'm like, that's the part that frustrates me, because these are the people who would grow up to be these quote unquote Uncle Toms in the modern era who don't associate themselves with being black. People always get mad. I always hear it now. So in the black community, it's kind of a universal sign that when a black person sees another black person, usually on default, you go like, you ain't even got to know the black person. Like, it's just a sign of acknowledgement. And I've heard so many black people in recent years talk about, why is it black people don't really do that anymore? Especially like in other countries. I'm like, because they don't really connect, because they don't assume just because we're the same color skin or from the same nationality that all of a sudden there has to be this default camaraderie. Like that's not always the case. And the black communities felt more fragmented because of that stuff, because they were openly rejected for things that they had nothing, that was not worth getting on them or busting them out about. You put them in a box and you push them off to the side and say, well, I guess their skin color is the same. Why do you think you always hear conversations about mixed kids? Mixed kids having such a hard time because of those things. They always, I think, who was it who said it? Was it J. Cole who said it? It was either J. Cole or Charles Gambino who said something like, I was too black for the white kids, but I was too white for the black kids. So he never fit in. They never fit in anywhere. You wanna know why that was said? Because it was true. People like that, and people always, when they hear that, they always focus on the, of course, white kids wouldn't accept you, you're black. But they never talk about the other side where it's like, well, why wouldn't you accept me? We're black. Like you didn't accept me because of my interests. I didn't act black enough for you, because we started associating the way we acted with our race, and not the fact that people have different personalities regardless of the color of their skin. And that shit eats at you. They don't understand kids in our, and the problem is that, and I don't want to act like it's completely their fault, because let's be real here. This is the first time this generation of parents had to deal with anything like this. Remember, their generation was segregated all the fucking time and got stuck in their communities. But as black people started becoming more successful and integrating more with white people because they were just able to get into the same lanes as them, you had more kids growing up acting less like stereotypical black kids. And so the parents did not know how to connect with kids who acted like that. So I understand it wasn't like it was intentional shutting out and your mom didn't want to come talk to you because of some bullshit like, oh, well, he's not, like she didn't know how to do it. If you only grew up in the ghetto and you only know the ghetto, it's not like you're not going to immediately see a child who's speaking proper English and go, that's normal. Like it's I understand that there was a transitionary period and you didn't have any basis for it. And so I don't blame parents for struggling with their kids because of that stuff, because they had no reference point. At the same time, I feel like parents need to acknowledge that they ended up hurting their children. It may not have been intentionally. It may not have been with like full malice, but you ended up hurting your kids. And you didn't end up protecting your kids because then they got hurt by everybody else. And then they grew up angry and bitter at their whole race, which isn't fair because it goes into the same blind bigotry that was going on the other side of the coin. You hating an entire race of people because of the actions of a few, which is the same thing as busting out an entire race of people because of the actions of a few. But they wonder why you got so many quote unquote Uncle Tom as men and women and others, I guess, acting the way they do. I'm like, I'm not, once again, their actions aren't really, but you got to understand that your generation of kids probably helped create that individual. People are shaped by their experiences. If I spend my entire childhood getting chastised by other races, by my own race for being different, and then thrown out into the world where other races treat me better than my own race, you know what that tends to create? A bias towards other races, and you tend to be harder on your own race just because of that. Once again, not saying that's intrinsically right, but you got to understand everyone has a part to play in this world, and unfortunately, some of us played a negative part in people's lives. I think people do that every day without realizing it, but they never want to take responsibility for it because that means you would have to then admit that you did something wrong. It doesn't have to be with malintention, but you did something wrong. Just be real about it. That's all you got to say. It wasn't like I'm not saying you were mean or evil, but you did something wrong. And don't invalidate another person's feelings because you messed up. If I messed up and I caused you pain, I'm sorry for causing you pain. I'm sorry for doing these things. I didn't know at the time. It doesn't necessarily take your pain away, but just know I wasn't trying to maliciously hurt you. The kicker here is a lot of people who said that Uncle Tom shit or said that acting white or that Oreo shit, some of y'all were trying to hurt those kids intentionally. Then guess what you did? And then you created the same quote unquote Uncle Tom ass niggas 20 years later, still jaded because they were constantly reminded by everyone. And the kicker is that some of their comments now are deserved, but they won't see past it because back when it wasn't deserved, they got the same treatment. Please leave your thoughts and comments in the comment section below. Hope you guys enjoyed. Happy Black History Month. I wasn't actually laughing. I was just maniacally, quietly laughing. This is a little different. Just a little bit.